When he shouted those words, the whole room froze. "Stop pretending to be family. You're just our maid." His voice cut through the music like a blade. My son-in-law, standing in his tailored suit in the middle of his brand new house, stared at me with a look of disgust I will never forget. The laughter of the guests died instantly. Champagne glasses hovered in midair. Someone dropped a fork. My daughter Anna stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the floor as if the marble tiles had suddenly become fascinating. I stood at the doorway holding the small box wrapped in golden paper that I had spent hours preparing that morning, a simple housewarming gift, a small clock I had chosen because I thought it would remind them that time never waits for love or forgiveness. I felt my fingers tremble, but I didn't move. For a second, I wasn't sure I had heard him right. Maybe it was the noise, maybe the music, but then he repeated it louder this time with an ugly laugh that made my stomach twist. "Did you hear me, old lady? This party is for family and friends, not for servants." He glanced at the guests, expecting their approval, and a few of them smiled awkwardly, not knowing what to do. The humiliation came like a sudden wave of heat rising from my chest to my face. I could feel every eye in that room burning holes through my skin. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my blouse. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "I'm not the maid," I whispered, my throat dry. But before I could finish, Anna stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "Please, Daniel," she said under her breath. "She's my mother." He pulled his arm away and sneered. "Then why does she show up here looking like this? You said she was retired. I thought she lived somewhere else." His words hung in the air like smoke, thick and poisonous. For a moment, I wanted to disappear. The elegant chandelier above us glittered cruelly, reflecting my shaking hands, the cracked skin and the wrinkles that seemed deeper than ever. I realized I didn't belong in that room, not in their eyes. But I also knew something they didn't. The walls around them, the marble floor beneath their designer shoes, the entire building they were standing in, all of it existed because of me. My voice when it finally came was calm, almost too calm. "I'm sorry," I said softly, setting the box down on the hallway table. "I didn't mean to disturb your celebration." Then I turned to leave each step heavy, my back straight, despite the sting of humiliation. Behind me, the whispers started again, rising and falling like the rustle of dry leaves. I could hear someone murmur, "Is she really her mother?" Someone else answered, "She looks more like a cleaner than a lawyer's mother." Outside, the evening air hit my face, cool and sharp. I took a deep breath, but the tears I had been holding back finally escaped. I sat on the stone steps of the porch, the laughter from inside echoing faintly through the closed door. The box still sat on the table inside, unopened, unwanted. I stared at the glow from the windows and whispered to myself, "So this is what it feels like to be erased from your own family." As I sat there, memories flooded my mind, the nights I worked until dawn to pay for Anna's education, the years I saved every penny to buy the land where this house now stood. I remembered signing the papers transferring the property into her name because she had begged me to trust her. "It's just easier this way, Mom," she had said. "Daniel and I can handle the maintenance and taxes." I had smiled, then proud of her confidence, believing she had found someone who would take care of her. Foolish, I know now. Inside, a burst of laughter broke through the closed windows. I looked up at the sky, wondering if the stars could see me, if they could hear the sound of a mother's heart breaking quietly in the dark. Have you ever been treated like a stranger by your own child? Have you ever felt invisible in a place you built with your own hands? That night, sitting on those cold steps, I made myself a promise. They could strip me of my pride, but not of my truth. And one day soon, that truth would speak louder than all their insults combined. They thought I was powerless, just an old woman who didn't belong. They thought I had nothing left but memories. They were wrong. If you're watching this, tell me, what would you do if your own child lets someone humiliate you? Like that comment one, "If no parent deserves this," or hit, like if your heart hurts just hearing it. Because this was the night they learned what happens when a mother decides to stop being silent. It started 3 months before that humiliating night. Back then, I still believed everything between us was normal, or at least what passed for normal in a family where love had turned into polite distance. I would visit Anna every Sunday afternoon, bringing her small things, homemade soup, fresh bread flowers from my balcony. She would smile, distracted, always looking at her phone or glancing toward the door, waiting for Daniel to come back from work. At first, I thought it was just the rhythm of married life. People get busy, priorities shift. But slowly, I began to feel like a guest in my own daughter's life. That Sunday, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint. I noticed new furniture in the living room, elegant and expensive, the kind I knew they couldn't afford. "You redecorated?" I asked, setting the basket of bread on the kitchen counter. Anna gave me a nervous laugh. "Oh, just a few updates. Daniel likes modern design. He says it makes the space feel more valuable." Valuable. That word lingered. It wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about value. I walked it through the hallway and noticed something that made me stop. On the wall where my old family portrait used to hang there was a new frame, an abstract painting of gray and gold lines. My daughter's wedding photo was gone. My photo, the one of her graduation day, was gone too. The house looked polished, beautiful, and utterly soulless. Daniel came in a few minutes later, talking loudly on his phone. He didn't greet me. His voice was full of that fake confidence that always hides insecurity. Yes. The appraisal came in higher than expected," he said, pacing across the living room. "We just need the title confirmation, then we're good to go. The old lady will sign soon." I froze my hands, still wet from washing a dish. The old lady. It couldn't be me he was talking about, could it? I turned around slowly, pretending to dry my hands with the towel. He noticed me then and gave me a stiff smile. "Oh, Mrs. Teresa, didn't see you there." I smiled back politely, but my stomach was twisting. After he hung up, I asked, "Everything all right?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Just business. We're looking at refinancing options for the property." You wouldn't understand. His tone was gentle, but there was something under it, a quiet condescension that stung more than open rudeness. "Refinancing?" I asked, forcing a smile. "You mean for this house?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, the paperwork is almost done. You know how it is, lots of bureaucracy." That night, I couldn't sleep. The phrase title confirmation echoed in my mind like a bell. I knew the house was still legally connected to me. I had transferred management rights to Anna, not full ownership. That distinction mattered, but to Daniel, I was just an old woman too naive to notice legal language. I had spent 40 years as a lawyer fighting contracts, more complicated than any he could imagine. But he didn't know that. He never asked what I did before retirement. He assumed I was just another widowed mother living off her daughter's kindness. The next week, I went back to check on Anna. She greeted me with forced cheer. "Mom, I'm so glad you came. Daniel's been asking about you. It sounded rehearsed." "That's kind of him," I said, stepping inside. Papers were scattered on the dining table. When she noticed my eyes moving toward them, she quickly started gathering them up. Oh, it's nothing she said too fast. Just mortgage documents. My pulse quickened. "Mortgage documents, but you own this place outright." She hesitated. "Daniel said it's just a formality." I sat down slowly, feeling a familiar coldness creep through my chest. "Anna, did you sign anything recently?" Her eyes darted toward the hallway where Daniel's voice echoed faintly from his office. "I signed some documents for him to handle the taxes. It's all routine, Mom. Don't worry so much." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the lie. I reached across the table, taking her hand. "Sweetheart, you know I used to read contracts for a living. Let me see the papers next time, just to be sure everything's right." She smiled thinly and pulled her hand back. "Daniel said it's private, Mom. It's our home now. You don't have to worry about these things anymore." I walked home that evening with the sky turning purple above the rooftops, the smell of rain in the air. I felt an ache I hadn't felt since my husband died, the ache of being left out of my own life. Something inside me whispered that I was losing not just my daughter's affection, but everything I had built for her. Still, I tried to believe she wouldn't betray me. A mother always wants to believe that. But later that week, the mail brought me something that confirmed my fears. It was a letter from the city assessor's office addressed to me as the primary holder of estate. Inside was a note ownership inquiry initiated by secondary resident Daniel Coleman. My hands shook as I read it. He wasn't just trying to manage the property, he was preparing to take it. That night I sat by the window of my small apartment, the lights of their new house visible in the distance. It glowed like a jewel, bright and untouchable. My voice cracked as I whispered to the empty room. You built that house for your daughter Teresa. Don't let them take it from you. I didn't know then just how far Daniel would go, but I could feel the storm gathering. Every polite smile he gave me was a mask. Every visit to that house was a step deeper into a web I hadn't seen forming. And somewhere deep inside, I began to understand that one day soon, I would have to fight for more than a home. I would have to fight for my dignity. They had no idea the old woman they were trying to outsmart had spent her entire life defending people from predators exactly like them. They thought I was weak. They were about to find out how wrong they were. If you were in my place and found out your own child's husband was trying to steal your home, would you stay silent or fight back? Comment 1 if you'd fight to protect what's yours, and like if you think betrayal always comes with a smile. The following month brought the kind of silence that weighs heavier than words. Anna stopped calling as often. The visits that once happened every week dwindled to polite text messages, always short, always distracted. I've been busy, Mom. Daniel's been working late. We'll see you soon. That soon stretched into weeks. I tried to convince myself that it was normal that they were just settling into married life, that she wasn't avoiding me. But a mother knows when something isn't right. There's a particular kind of distance that can't be explained by work or time. It's the distance of guilt. One Saturday morning, as I was watering the small garden outside my apartment, my neighbor Linda called out from her porch. Teresa, dear, did you sell your building? I frowned. Sell it, no. Why would I do that? Linda looked uneasy. Well, I could swear I saw 2 men with a camera and clipboards outside your daughter's place yesterday. They were taking photos of the front, the windows, even the garden. When I asked them what they were doing, one of them said they were real estate surveyors. My heart skipped a beat. Did they say who sent them? She shook her head. They just smiled and said it was a private evaluation. That phrase, private evaluation, ripped through me like a cold wind. I thanked Linda, but my mind was already racing. I went inside, grabbed my coat, and drove straight to Anna's neighborhood. The moment I turned the corner, I saw them 2 men standing by the gate with measuring tools and a tablet. I parked across the street and watched as they entered through the side door. Daniel stepped out of the house to greet them. Shaking hands, his usual smug smile plastered across his face. He was showing them around like a proud owner. Every now and then he pointed toward the roof, then the yard, then the fence, as if describing the boundaries of his property. My property. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, but I also knew I had to be careful. A storm reveals itself only when it's ready. I watched until the men left, then I drove away before Daniel could notice me. That evening, I tried calling Anna. She didn't pick up. I called again and again. On the 4th try, she answered, her voice tired and cautious. Mom, can we talk later? It's been a long day. Later, I asked quietly. Anna, I just passed by the house. There were people there taking pictures. Who were they? A pause. Too long, just inspectors, Mom. Daniel's handling insurance paperwork. Insurance, I repeated. I thought you finished that months ago. It's complicated, she said, and then her tone hardened. Please stop worrying about everything. Daniel knows what he's doing. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the light off, only the glow of the city creeping through the window. I tried to convince myself that she was telling the truth, but the voice inside me, the one that had kept me alive through years of raising her alone, kept whispering, "You're being shut out." 2 days later, Linda came knocking again. She held her phone up, showing me a photo she had taken discreetly. It showed Daniel talking to a woman in a gray suit, an agent from a well-known real estate company. Behind them, the for sale folder glinted under the sunlight. I didn't mean to pry, Linda said softly, but I thought you should see this. I stared at the photo, my pulse pounding in my ears. "He's trying to sell it," I murmured. "He's really trying to sell it." I drove to the house the next morning unannounced. Daniel opened the door, clearly surprised. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Teresa, what a surprise. I was in the area. I lied. I wanted to see my daughter." "She's not home," he said quickly. "She went out with friends." "Then I'll wait," I said, stepping past him before he could stop me. The living room looked different, staged. Minimalist furniture, bright lighting, no personal touches. On the coffee table sat a glossy brochure with the title, Exclusive Property Portfolio. My house was on the cover. Planning something, I asked, my tone calm but sharp. Daniel froze for a second, then laughed nervously. "Oh, that, just a marketing sample. My friend's a realtor." A friend, I picked up the brochure, flipping through it slowly. Every page was a photograph of the property from different angles. There was even a tagline, "Luxury living in the heart of the city. Now available for private buyers." "You call this friendship, Daniel," he shifted uncomfortably. "It's just a concept. No one's selling anything." Before I could respond, the door opened and Anna stepped inside. Her smile faltered the moment she saw me holding the brochure. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I should be asking you that," I said quietly. "Why is our home listed for sale?" Her face went pale. "It's not like that," she stammered. Daniel was just exploring options. "Options," I interrupted. "Options for what? For throwing me out." Daniel's voice turned cold. "You're misunderstanding everything, Mrs. Teresa. You gave this property to Anna, didn't you? That makes it hers. We can do what we want with it." His words hit me like a slap. I looked at my daughter, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she stayed silent. Her silence was worse than any insult. "Anna," I said softly, "tell me that isn't true." She looked down at the floor, tears forming in her eyes. "Mom, please don't make this harder. Daniel thinks selling might help us start fresh." I laughed, but it wasn't from humor. It was the bitter, trembling sound of a woman realizing the full depth of betrayal. "Start fresh, with my house, with the roof your father built with his hands." Anna flinched at the mention of her father, but Daniel stepped forward. "We're not here to argue about the past. Times change. Property changes hands. It's business." "No, Daniel," I said, straightening my back. "It's not business. It's betrayal." I walked out without another word. The street outside blurred as tears clouded my eyes. I stopped halfway down the block and looked back at the building glowing under the afternoon sun. It looked different now, not like the home where I had once dreamed of my daughter's happiness, but like a monument to greed. That night, I took out the old file where I had kept every legal document, every signature, every clause. And there it was, the hidden truth Daniel had overlooked. I hadn't transferred full ownership. The deed still bore my name as the original and controlling owner. They thought I was powerless, but they hadn't read the fine print. The next morning, I went to the notary's office. When Mr. Howard, an old colleague from my legal days, saw me, he smiled kindly. "Teresa, it's been years." "I need your help," I said. "Someone's trying to sell my house." He frowned, flipping through the property file I handed him. "Then they're in for a surprise. You still hold legal rights to the entire structure. They can't sell a single brick without your consent." I exhaled slowly, the first breath of relief I had felt in months. "Thank you," I said. "I'm going to need official proof." He nodded. "I'll prepare it. But what are you planning to do?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm going to let them throw their party, and then I'm going to end it. If you found out your own child was helping someone sell your home behind your back, what would you do? Confront them or wait for the perfect moment? Comment 1. If you'd make them face the truth, like if you'd let karma do the talking. After that day, everything between Anna and me changed completely. The warmth that used to fill her voice whenever she said Mom vanished, replaced by something cold and distant, something that stung more than open hatred. She stopped visiting altogether. When I called, Daniel always answered his tone, polite but empty. "She's busy, Mrs. Teresa. Maybe another time." He had started calling me Mrs. Teresa as if I were a neighbor or a tenant, not his wife's mother, not the woman whose life had built the walls around him. Weeks passed. The silence grew thicker, heavier, until even my own apartment felt foreign. I'd stand by the window every evening watching the lights flicker from their house across the street. Sometimes I saw them through the window, laughing with friends, hosting dinners that I was never invited to. My name wasn't even mentioned anymore. It was as if I had died, and no one had bothered to tell me. One Sunday, I decided to bring them dinner anyway. I cooked Anna's favorite dish, slow-roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, just like I used to when she was a little girl. I wrapped it, carefully wore my cleanest dress, and walked to the house. My hands trembled slightly as I rang the doorbell. I waited for a long time before Daniel opened the door. He looked surprised, maybe even annoyed. "Oh, it's you." His voice carried no warmth. "I made dinner," I said quietly. "Just something simple. I thought we could eat together." He sighed and leaned against the doorframe, his expression a mixture of amusement and pity. "That's thoughtful, but we already have guests tonight. Maybe next time." I could hear laughter inside, clinking glasses, music. I recognized Anna's voice mingled with others. My daughter was inside, but she didn't come to the door. "I can leave it here," I offered, holding up the container. He shook his head. "It's fine. We don't need it." Then, lowering his voice just enough for me to hear, he added, "You really shouldn't show up unannounced. It makes people uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. That word lodged deep in my chest. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite nod. "I understand," I said softly. He closed the door before I'd even turned away. I stood there for a few seconds, the smell of the food rising faintly from the container in my hands, the laughter spilling through the walls behind me. I left the food on their porch, walked home, and cried for the first time in years. The next morning, I received a message from Anna. It was short. "Mom, please don't come by without calling first. Daniel thinks it's better if we set boundaries." Boundaries. I read the word over and over, my eyes blurring. I typed and deleted my reply a dozen times before finally writing, "I understand. Take care of yourself." Then I set the phone down and stared at it until the screen went dark. Days turned into weeks. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment and the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. I tried to distract myself, watering the plants, cleaning the cupboards, baking bread I never ate, but the loneliness was a shadow that followed me everywhere. Some nights, I'd wake up thinking I heard Anna calling for me like she used to when she had nightmares as a child. I would rush to the door before realizing it was just the wind outside mocking my hope. One afternoon, Linda came by again. She brought a pie and that look of cautious sympathy people wear when they know something you don't. I saw Anna at the grocery store. She began gently. She pretended not to see me, but I overheard her talking to a friend. She said Daniel's trying to get her to convince you to sign some papers, something about a legal transfer. I felt the ground shift under me. "So it's true," I whispered. "He's still after it." Linda nodded slowly. She didn't look happy, Teresa. She looked trapped. That night, I sat by the window watching the lights in their house again. Through the curtain, I could see silhouettes, moving shadows, dancing on the walls. It struck me that I used to know every corner of that home, every crack, every sound. Now it was as if I were peering into a stranger's life. The ache inside me grew unbearable. I walked to my small bookshelf, pulled out an old photo album, and sat down at the kitchen table. The pages smelled faintly of time and dust. There she was, Anna, at 5 years old, wearing her father's oversized hat, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Another photo showed us painting the fence together, our hands covered in blue and white streaks. We had so little then, but those were the happiest years of my life. I ran my fingers over the photos and whispered, "Where did you go, my girl?" What happened to the child who used to say she'd take care of me when I was old? The next morning, I tried calling again just to hear her voice. Daniel answered. "She's busy," he said curtly, "and please stop calling during work hours." His tone was no longer even pretending to be polite. "I'd like to speak to my daughter, not you," I said, my voice steady. He laughed quietly. "You don't seem to understand, Mrs. Teresa. This isn't your house anymore. This isn't your life. Let Anna live her own." The line went dead before I could reply. That night, I sat in my dark living room, the air heavy with silence. For the first time, I felt something inside me break, not just sadness, but exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from loving people who have decided you're no longer useful to them. I looked around my small apartment and realized how empty it had become. Even the photographs on the walls seemed to stare back at me with pity. But beneath that grief, something else began to stir, a quiet, defiant strength. It was the same strength that had carried me through years of hardship after my husband died, the same strength that had pushed me to study law when everyone said I was too old, the same strength that had built that house brick by brick. I wiped my tears and whispered to myself, "They think they've silenced me, but they've only reminded me who I am." The next morning, I called Mr. Howard again. "Prepare everything I said. I want every document certified, sealed, and ready. If they plan to sell my home, I'll make sure the world knows who really owns it." That night, as I stood by the window, the lights in their house were still glowing. I watched them flicker and thought, let them enjoy their celebration while they can, because soon the truth would come knocking on their perfect little door. If your own child turned their back on you and let someone treat you like a burden, what would you do? Would you forgive them, or would you show them who you truly are? Comment 1 if you believe silence can be the sharpest weapon. And, if you think respect should never depend on age or wealth. The breaking point came one night in late November when the rain wouldn't stop and the wind howled through the cracks of my old apartment like an uninvited guest. The city lights blurred through the downpour, turning the streets into mirrors of gray and gold. I sat alone at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a pale circle of light over the pile of unopened mail in front of me. Most of it was junk bills, advertisements, political flyers, but at the bottom was an envelope with my daughter's handwriting. My heart leapt for a moment before dread settled in. The letter wasn't long, just a few cold lines that read, "Mom, please, don't make this harder. Daniel says we need you to sign the transfer papers soon. It's for the best. We can't keep paying taxes on a house that's technically yours. You're not being replaced, just making things simpler for everyone. Please don't make us choose between you and our future." There was no love, Anna. No signature, just her name typed neatly at the bottom as if she were writing a business memo, not speaking to her mother. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. My hand shook as I set it down. The air in the room grew heavy, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. I whispered, "Choose between me and your future. I am your past, your present, and the reason you have any future at all." That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the rain slam against the glass, each drop like a drumbeat of betrayal. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for her, working 2 jobs after her father died, skipping meals so she could attend university, selling my wedding ring to pay her tuition. Every memory cut deeper, sharper, until it felt like I was bleeding from the inside out. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of knocking. It was gentle at first, then louder. When I opened the door, Linda stood there with an umbrella, dripping rain onto the floor. "Teresa, are you all right?" she asked, her face pale with concern. "I saw your lights on all night." I tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "I'm fine, just a little tired." She stepped inside and looked at the mess on the table, the unopened mail, the cold cup of tea, the letter. Her eyes softened when she read the name. "She wrote to you." I nodded. "She wants me to give up the house." Linda put her hand over mine. "You don't have to give them anything. That house is your life's work." I nodded again, but my voice came out barely above a whisper. "She's my only child, Linda. How do you fight your own blood?" Linda's tone hardened, not out of cruelty, but conviction. Sometimes you fight because they're your blood, because if you don't, they'll never learn what family truly means. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time, replaying her words over and over. Somewhere inside me, a spark flickered. It wasn't anger yet, not fully. It was something smaller, quieter, but far more dangerous. It was resolve. 2 days later, Daniel called. His tone was unusually polite. "Mrs. Teresa, I just wanted to check if you received Anna's letter. We'll have a notary come by next week to finalize everything." I stayed silent long enough for him to start sounding nervous. "Mrs. Teresa, I received it," I said finally. "But I'm not signing anything." His voice turned cold. "You're making this unnecessarily complicated. You don't even live there anymore. That doesn't mean it isn't mine." I replied, my tone steady. "And until I'm in the ground, no one touches that house." He laughed softly, but there was tension behind it. "I wouldn't push this too far if I were you. You don't know what you're up against." "No," I said, smiling into the phone. "You don't know who you're up against." When the call ended, I felt something shift inside me. The fog of sadness that had clouded my mind for weeks lifted, replaced by clarity. For the first time in months, I saw things exactly as they were. I wasn't weak. I wasn't a burden. I was a woman who had spent her life building things, family, career, legacy. And now those who had benefited from my sacrifices were trying to erase me. That night, I opened the old chest at the foot of my bed and took out a wooden box that hadn't been touched in years. Inside were my husband's work gloves, a faded photo of us holding baby Anna, and a small envelope marked property titles. I ran my fingers across the paper, remembering the day he had signed them over to me before his illness took him. "Promise me," he had said, "you'll protect this house. It's more than a building, it's our story." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they didn't fall. I whispered, "I promise, Robert, I'll protect it, even from our own child." The next morning, I visited the house again. I didn't go inside, I just stood across the street watching. Workers were unloading boxes, new furniture designer pieces, things that screamed of vanity. The home I once filled with warmth now looked like a showroom. When Anna came out to greet the movers, she spotted me. For a brief second, I saw guilt flash across her face. Then she looked away. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just turned back to Daniel, pretending I wasn't there. That was the moment I knew something had died between us. I went home and collapsed into the chair by the window. My body felt heavy, my heart even heavier. For hours I stared at the rain streaking down the glass. Every drop carried a memory, her laughter as a little girl, her first day of school, the way she used to say, "Mom, you're my hero." Somewhere along the way, those words had faded, and in their place came silence. But as night fell, the despair began to change shape. Beneath the grief was something sharper. I realized that the people who had humiliated me believed they had already won. They thought I was too tired, too old, too broken to fight back. They had no idea that everything they stood on, every brick, every paper, every dollar, was bound to my name. I took out my journal and began to write, not for comfort, but for strategy. I wrote every detail, the visits, the documents, the photographs Linda had taken, the letter from Anna, the call from Daniel. By the time the clock struck midnight, I had a full record of their deceit. The next morning, I would visit Mr. Howard again. As I closed the journal, I caught my reflection in the window. My hair was gray, my face lined, but my eyes were alive again. For the first time in years, they didn't look defeated. They looked dangerous. If your own child betrayed you, sold your trust for comfort and pride, would you let it break you, or would you rise from it stronger than ever? Comment 1. If you believe no storm can destroy a mother's strength, like if you know that silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. When dawn broke the next morning, I felt different. The fog of sorrow that had wrapped itself around me for weeks was gone, replaced by an almost unnerving calm. I made myself a cup of black coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the folder of documents I had gathered the night before. Each paper told a story of the life I had built, the years I had worked, the nights I had stayed awake, balancing accounts while Anna slept peacefully in the next room. And now these same papers would become my armor. At exactly 9, I arrived at Mr. Howard's office. The receptionist recognized me immediately and led me to his desk. He looked up from his paperwork with a kind smile that reminded me of my late husband. "Teresa, I've reviewed everything you sent me. You were right not to sign those transfer papers." He slid a thick file toward me. "This is the original deed of ownership. It clearly states that while you allowed your daughter managerial rights, you retained controlling ownership of the property. No transaction or sale can proceed without your written consent." I exhaled slowly, a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for months. "So legally, that house is still mine." He nodded firmly. "Every inch of it. They can't even paint the walls without your approval." A strange satisfaction stirred inside me, but it wasn't gloating. It was justice. Quiet earned inevitable. "Can you certify these copies for me?" I asked, "and prepare an official statement confirming my ownership." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "Of course. But may I ask, what are you planning to do?" I smiled, though the expression didn't reach my eyes. "I'm planning to attend a celebration." By the end of the day, I had every legal document neatly organized in a leather folder. The ownership certificate, the deed, the notarized statement, each stamped and signed. They looked like ordinary papers, but to me they were the keys to reclaiming everything I had lost. On my way home, I stopped by a small bakery and ordered a cake. The woman behind the counter asked, "Special occasion?" I hesitated, then answered, "Yes, a family gathering." That evening, I sat by the window again, but this time I didn't feel invisible. I was waiting. I knew Daniel and Anna were planning their grand housewarming party that weekend, the same one that they had bragged about on social media, inviting friends, colleagues, and neighbors. The same party I had not been invited to. I had scrolled through Anna's post the night before, her words slicing through me like glass. "Can't wait to celebrate our new beginning in our beautiful home." Not a single mention of me. They thought I wouldn't come. They thought I would hide in my apartment, ashamed, forgotten. But I had decided that if they wanted to play with appearances, I would give them a performance they'd never forget. 2 days later, I arrived at the house. The street was crowded with cars. Laughter spilled from the open windows. I stood outside for a moment, taking it all in the glow of the chandeliers, the music, the smell of expensive perfume, mixed with arrogance. I walked to the door and rang the bell. The maid, a young woman I had never seen before, opened it. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked politely. I smiled. "Yes, tell your employers their maid has come to celebrate with them." When I stepped inside, heads turned. Daniel was at the center of the living room holding a glass of champagne. His face froze when he saw me. Anna was beside him, radiant in a silver dress until she followed his gaze. The color drained from her face. "Mom," she whispered. The crowd fell silent. The music faded, as if even the speakers were holding their breath. Daniel recovered first, forcing a laugh. "Well, this is unexpected." I looked around the room, my voice calm but steady. I heard there was a party. I didn't want to miss the chance to see how beautifully my house turned out. A murmur rippled through the guests. Daniel's smile stiffened. "Your house," he said, the amusement fading from his tone. "I think you're confused, Mrs. Teresa." Before he could continue, I set my leather folder on the nearest table and opened it slowly. "Am I asked, pulling out the certified deed? Because according to the state of California, I'm still the legal owner of this property, the one you've been trying to sell without my consent." Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered against the marble floor. Anna looked at me in horror, her lips trembling. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I said simply. "You both lied. You humiliated me. You made me feel like a stranger in my own home. But I never stopped being the one who built this place." I turned to the guests, my voice growing stronger. "Do you know what's funny? They call this their new beginning, but they've been living off my sacrifices since the day they met." Daniel stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You're ruining everything. Do you realize what you're doing?" "Yes," I said, locking eyes with him. "I'm taking back what's mine." He glanced at the guests, trying to regain control. "This is insane. She's confused. The house was transferred years ago. I held up the document so everyone could see the official seal." "No, Daniel, it wasn't. You should have read the fine print." The murmur grew louder. Someone whispered, "Is that real?" Another said, "She owns the house." I looked around the room and felt the power shift. For months I had been invisible. Tonight I was undeniable. Anna's voice trembled as she spoke. "Mom, please, can we talk privately?" I turned to her, my expression softening slightly. "Privately? Like when you sold my trust in private, like when you let him speak to me like I was a stranger." "No, my dear. We're going to talk right here." Daniel tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to remind you of something. This house wasn't built for greed or pride. It was built for love. The love your father and I poured into every brick so that one day you could have a home, but somewhere along the way you forgot what home means. A hush fell over the room. Anna's eyes filled with tears. Daniel's jaw tightened. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. I took a slow breath and continued. You wanted a celebration. Here it is, the truth in front of everyone you wanted to impress. I turned to the guests, my voice calm but cutting. If any of you plan to invest in this couple's future, you should know what kind of people you're dealing with. A man who would steal from his own mother-in-law, a daughter who would stay silent while he did it. The room erupted in whispers. Daniel's face turned crimson. You can't prove any of this, he shouted. I held up my phone. I already have. Every document, every conversation, every photograph, it's all recorded. And if you doubt me, I can have my lawyer send you the files tomorrow. Silence followed. For the first time, Daniel looked small, almost fragile. Anna covered her face with her hands. I gathered my papers, placed them back in the folder, and straightened my coat. You wanted me out of your life, I said quietly. Be careful what you wish for, because after tonight I'll be out, but you'll never escape the shadow of what you've done. I turned to leave. No one stopped me. As I reached the door, I paused and looked back one last time. One more thing, I said softly. Next time you call someone a maid, make sure you know who really owns the house you're standing in. Then I walked into the night, the cool air hitting my face like freedom. For the first time in months, I felt alive. They thought they had broken me, but they had only forged me into something stronger. If you discovered your own child and their spouse were stealing everything you built, would you forgive them or make them face the truth in front of the world? Comment 1. If you'd stand up for your dignity, like if you believe silence ends when justice begins. When I stepped outside that night, the air was sharp with winter chill, yet my hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the adrenaline pulsing through me. The scene inside had shaken the foundation of their perfect little illusion, but the storm wasn't over. I had only cracked the glass. Now I needed to shatter it completely. 2 days later, Daniel called me. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, now carried a strained politeness. Mrs. Teresa, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can meet privately, clear the air. His tone was syrupy, sweet, and it made my skin crawl. Privately, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. You mean quietly, so no one hears what you really are. There was a pause. Then, with forced calm, he said, Let's not make this uglier than it has to be, for Anna's sake. I agreed to meet him the next afternoon, not because I believed in his sudden civility, but because I needed to look him in the eye one last time before everything unraveled. I chose the place carefully, the very house he had tried to steal from me. When I arrived, the house was silent. The party decorations were gone. The laughter that once filled the air had been replaced by tension so thick it felt like fog. Daniel opened the door. He looked tired. His eyes rimmed red, the confident smirk nowhere to be seen. Come in, he said quietly. The living room was immaculate again, as if he thought tidiness could erase guilt. Anna wasn't there. I looked around, taking in the walls, the staircase, the furniture, everything that had once felt like love, now tainted by betrayal. Where's my daughter? I asked. She's staying at her friend's for a few days, he replied. She needs time. I almost laughed. Time to what? Convince herself she isn't married to a thief. He flinched, but quickly masked it with a strained smile. Mrs. Teresa, please. Let's talk like adults. He gestured to the couch. I didn't move. Talk, I said flatly. He sat, clasping his hands. Look, I know things got heated. You're upset, I understand. But you have to see the bigger picture. The taxes, the maintenance, the renovations, it's too much for you. I was only trying to help manage things efficiently. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Efficiently, you were trying to sell my house behind my back. Daniel's mask cracked. That's not true, he snapped, standing abruptly. You don't understand how property management works. You're old Teresa. You live in the past. This house could be worth millions if handled correctly. I was trying to secure our future. Our, I repeated. You mean your future. You don't have one without this house, do you? He glared at me, his voice dropping into something darker. Don't push me. You think you're so clever with your papers and your legal tricks, but you're not the only one who can play that game. You'll regret making a scene. I stepped closer. my voice steady, every word deliberate. "You're threatening me now." He hesitated, realizing how it sounded. "No, I'm saying we can still fix this privately without more humiliation. Sign the transfer papers and I'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll never have to worry about bills again." I stared at him almost in disbelief. "You want to buy me off after stealing from me, lying to me, humiliating me in front of strangers?" He looked at me like I was an obstacle, an inconvenient detail in a transaction. "You're being emotional," he said coldly. "It's not about lying, it's business. Business." My voice rose, sharp and clear. "Let me tell you something, Daniel. I built this business from nothing. I drafted every clause, signed every contract, earned every dollar that paid for these walls. You married into comfort, but you did nothing to deserve it." He opened his mouth to reply, but I cut him off. "You think I'm old, weak, naive. That's your first mistake. Your second mistake was assuming I didn't keep every document, every receipt, every proof of ownership. And your third mistake, I took a step closer, lowering my voice, was underestimating a woman who's lost everything once before. I have nothing left to fear." For a moment he looked rattled, then he smirked again, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You can't scare me with old papers, Teresa. I've already spoken to a lawyer. There's nothing you can do." I smiled faintly. "Then your lawyer must be as blind as you are, because tomorrow morning I'm meeting with the notary who handled this property. He'll verify everything publicly." His smirk vanished. Publicly, he repeated, "You wouldn't dare." I leaned closer, my eyes locked on his. "Wouldn't I? You humiliated me in public. Remember, you made me the maid in my own house. It's only fair that everyone sees who the real fraud is." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt electric, dangerous. Then Daniel's composure finally cracked. "You're going to destroy your daughter's life," he shouted. "If this goes public, her reputation, her job, everything will crumble." I straightened my back. "No, Daniel. You destroyed her life when you decided greed mattered more than love. I'm just showing her the truth." He stared at me, breathing heavily, his face pale. I turned toward the door, but before I could leave, he said quietly, "You'll regret this. You'll end up alone." I paused my hand on the door handle. "I've been alone for a long time," I said softly, "and I've survived worse than you." When I stepped outside, the air felt different, cleaner, colder, almost alive. For the first time in months, I felt free of fear. Tomorrow, the notary would come. Tomorrow, the truth would no longer be mine alone. As I walked down the quiet street, I thought of my husband's voice, calm and steady, echoing from years ago. When people show you what they value most, believe them. Daniel valued money. I valued dignity. And in that equation, I had already won. The moon broke through the clouds, lighting my path as if blessing the choice I had made. I whispered into the night, "You thought this story ended with my humiliation. But it's only beginning. If you discovered the person who stole from you still thought they could silence you, would you meet them in secret or face them head on? Comment 1 if you'd confront them without fear and if you believe some truths deserve to be spoken out loud." The next afternoon arrived cloaked in the kind of silence that precedes a storm. The sky was pale and heavy, the air charged with something that felt like consequence. I wore my late husband's gray wool coat, the one he used to wear to court when he wanted to look unshakable. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving and whispered, "For us." For every night we built that dream together. When I reached the house, cars lined the street again. It seemed Daniel and Anna had decided to continue pretending nothing had happened. The golden lights glowed behind the windows and laughter drifted faintly into the cold air. Another dinner party, another performance. I stood at the gate for a moment, breathing deeply, then walked up the path, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. I wasn't alone this time. Beside me walked Mr. Howard, holding a briefcase full of documents, his expression composed but resolute. The notary followed a small man in his 60s with steel-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather folder stamped with the seal of the county registrar. "Are you certain you want to do this here?" Mr. Howard asked quietly. "Once we begin, there's no going back." I nodded. They chose to shame me in public. Let them be unmasked in the same way. When the maid opened the door, her eyes widened slightly. She looked from me to the men behind me, unsure what to do. "Tell Mr. Coleman his mother-in-law has arrived," I said calmly. The girl hesitated, then disappeared inside. Moments later, Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale, his confidence slipping like wet paint. "What is this?" he asked sharply. I stepped inside, uninvited. "This," I said, "is the truth coming to dinner." The guests fell silent. Anna stood near the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand that trembled slightly. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Not here. Not now." "Here," I said, my voice steady but ringing through the room. "Now." Mr. Howard opened his briefcase and placed the documents neatly on the marble table. "I am Mr. Howard, legal counsel for Mrs. Teresa Coleman," he announced. "We're here regarding a matter of ownership concerning this property." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous. You can't just barge in here with your circus and—" The notary stepped forward, interrupting him. His voice was calm but authoritative. "Mr. Coleman, I am the official notary who handled this property's original title registration 27 years ago. After verifying the deeds and signatures, I can confirm that the current legal owner of this estate is Mrs. Teresa Coleman." A collective gasp spread through the room like wildfire. Chairs scraped the floor. The music cut off. Someone whispered, "She owns the house." Another murmured, "All this time." Daniel's face drained of color. "You must be mistaken," he stammered. "The property was transferred to my wife before our marriage. We have documents." Mr. Howard interrupted smoothly. "You have copies, forged ones. The originals remain under state record and bear no indication of transfer." He turned toward me. "Mrs. Coleman retained full ownership and legal authority. In fact, she could have you both removed tonight if she wished." The silence that followed was deafening. I turned slowly toward Anna. Her face was ashen, her eyes glistening with tears. "Mom," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" I met her gaze, the weight of years pressing on my chest. "Because I wanted you to live freely. Because I believed that love didn't need contracts or signatures. But I was wrong. I should have protected our home from greed, even if it came disguised as family." Daniel slammed his fist against the table. "This is insane. You can't humiliate us like this." "Humiliation?" I asked softly. "Do you remember that night, Daniel, when you told me to go eat outside because I wasn't family? You humiliated me in front of your guests, and my daughter said nothing. Tonight, the truth simply echoes what you created." The notary cleared his throat. "Legally speaking, Mr. Coleman, you have no right to occupy this house without Mrs. Coleman's consent. If she wishes, I can file an immediate order of eviction." Daniel's voice cracked. "You wouldn't do that," he said, turning to Anna. "Tell her, Anna. She wouldn't do that to her own daughter." Anna's eyes darted between us, her lips trembling. I don't know anymore." I stepped closer to her, my voice trembling but firm. "You let him turn you against your own mother. You stood by while he tried to erase me. Tell me, Anna, when he told you to choose between me and your future, did you ever stop to think that without me, you wouldn't have one?" Her tears fell silently. Daniel grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. "Don't touch me," she said quietly. The guests were no longer pretending not to listen. Phones were out, recording, capturing every word. Some of them looked at Daniel with disgust, others with pity. The man who had once flaunted his wealth now stood exposed, trembling under the weight of his own arrogance. Mr. Howard gathered the documents. "For the record, all transactions attempted under Mr. Coleman's name are hereby invalidated. Any further action will be considered fraud." He turned to me. "Mrs. Coleman, how would you like to proceed?" I looked around the room at the faces, the silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then I spoke every word deliberate. "I'm not evicting anyone tonight. I won't lower myself to that. But as of this moment, Daniel Coleman no longer has any rights to this home or to my daughter's trust. Tomorrow morning, the locks will be changed and security will be informed." Daniel's face twisted in rage. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You'll ruin us." "You ruined yourself," I said quietly, "when you traded decency for greed." Anna fell to her knees, sobbing. I went to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. "I raised you to be strong, not silent. If you want redemption, it starts with truth." She nodded weakly, clutching my hand. The notary signed the confirmation documents, his pen scratching softly across the paper. "It's done," he said. As he closed the folder, the room exhaled as one. The whispers returned like waves breaking against the shore. The cameras flashed again, but this time the lenses were aimed at me not as a subject of pity, but as a symbol of justice. I turned to Daniel one last time. His eyes burned with fury, but there was fear beneath it now. "I warned you," I said softly. "You called me a maid in my own home. Tonight you learned who the master really is." With that, I took Anna's hand and led her toward the door. The night air met us like a quiet applause. As we stepped outside, I could hear the murmurs from inside turning into a storm of voices, shock, disbelief, condemnation. It didn't matter anymore. The truth was out. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. I had reclaimed not just a house, but my dignity, my name, my place in the world. If someone stripped you of your respect and called you worthless, would you walk away, or would you rise and make them remember who you are? Comment 1. If you'd stand tall no matter the pain, like if you believe truth is the loudest revenge. By morning, the story had already escaped the walls of that house. What had begun as a private humiliation turned into something far bigger, an event that the entire neighborhood and soon half the city couldn't stop talking about. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing endlessly on the table. Dozens of missed calls, messages, notifications. It took me a moment to understand what was happening. Linda's voice came through the phone, first breathless with excitement. "Teresa, it's everywhere. Someone from the party posted the video. Everyone's talking about you. The woman who took back her house from her greedy son-in-law, that's what they're calling you." I sat there in silence, listening as she read out the headlines. "Elderly mother outsmarts son-in-law in viral confrontation. Justice served the woman who refused to be erased." The words didn't make me feel proud, not exactly, they just felt inevitable. The truth had a way of finding its way out like light slipping through cracks. When I walked outside, the air was crisp and bright. The neighborhood felt different. Strangers who once looked past me now smiled or nodded in quiet respect. The grocer waved from across the street. "Saw the video, Mrs. Teresa, you showed them what real strength looks like." Even the young delivery boy stopped his bike to say, "Ma'am, you're trending on TikTok. You're amazing." It was strange being seen again after so long. Not as an old woman to be pitied, but as someone who had drawn a line in the sand and refused to be crossed. By midday, reporters started gathering near the front gate of the house I had reclaimed. I didn't plan to speak to them, but when I saw how they swarmed around Daniel as he tried to leave shouting questions, microphones flashing in his face, I knew the story was no longer mine alone. "Mr. Coleman," one of them shouted, "is it true you tried to sell property that didn't belong to you?" Another asked, "Did you really call your mother-in-law a maid in her own home?" Daniel pushed past them, pale and sweating. His carefully built image of success was crumbling. He looked like a man drowning in his own lies. I watched from across the street, not with hatred, but with a strange sense of release. The world was giving him exactly what he had earned. Later that day, Linda came over carrying groceries. "You've started something, Teresa," she said with a grin. "People online are calling you the Iron Widow. You've become a symbol." I laughed softly. A symbol of what, she shrugged. Of dignity, of boundaries, of what happens when people push too far. She set the groceries down and looked at me seriously. "You know, half the women on my street have gone through something like this in silence. A son, a daughter, someone taking advantage of them. You gave them courage." That evening, I received an email from a women's foundation asking if I'd be willing to share my story publicly to talk about financial abuse of the elderly, about family betrayal, about standing up for yourself. I read the message twice before closing the laptop. For years I had been invisible, and now people wanted to hear my voice. It felt surreal, but also right. Across town, Daniel's downfall was unfolding rapidly. His company issued a statement distancing themselves from him after the video went viral. The bank he worked with suspended his account, pending investigation for fraudulent attempts to alter property documents. And Anna, poor Anna, had finally packed her things and left him. She came to my apartment 2 days later, her eyes swollen, her face hollow with regret. When I opened the door, she burst into tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped him. I should have believed you." I held her, not saying a word, just letting her cry against my shoulder the way she used to when she scraped her knees as a child. "You were scared," I said softly. "You mistook silence for safety. Now you know the difference." That same week, a local newspaper published an editorial titled, "Respect Has No Expiration Date." The writer described the viral video as a lesson in moral justice. The comment section was flooded with support. People wrote things like, "She's the mother we all wish we had," and "Never underestimate a woman who's been through everything." But not all comments were kind. Some accused me of going too far, of humiliating my own daughter. I read those too, and for a brief moment, doubt crept in. Had I crossed a line? Then I remembered the night Daniel had called me a maid, the look of pride on Anna's face fading into shame. Sometimes the truth hurts, not because it's cruel, but because it's necessary. A week later, I stood outside the house. Again, my house. The locks had been changed, the rooms emptied of their arrogance. The sun poured through the windows like it had been waiting to come home too. I had decided I wouldn't live there again. I didn't need to. Some homes exist only to be fought for, not inhabited. Instead, I turned it into something else. Teresa's Haven, a shelter for older women with nowhere to go. I used my savings and part of the house's equity to fund the first year. The local paper covered the opening. They asked me what the shelter meant to me. I looked straight into the camera and said, "It means no one gets to call you worthless in a home you built." As the weeks passed, the story of what happened that night became legend in the neighborhood. People still whispered about it at the cafe, at church, and grocery lines. But for me, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the quiet that comes after justice, the kind that settles deep inside you, like peace. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when a young woman approached me nervously. "Mrs. Teresa," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. My husband tried to take my savings last year, but I was too afraid to speak. After watching your story, I told him no. I left. You saved me." She reached for my hand, her eyes full of gratitude. I squeezed it gently. "No, dear," I said. "You saved yourself. You just needed to see someone else do it first." As she walked away, I looked up at the house one last time. The windows glowed softly in the dusk, and I thought of all the women who would sleep safely inside those walls from now on. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about reclaiming what was stolen dignity, safety worth. That night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote in my journal, "They called me a maid." But I became a mirror, instead one that showed them who they really were. If the world ever tells you you're too old to fight back, remember this age doesn't make you weaker. It makes you unstoppable when you've had enough. Comment 1. If you believe justice has no deadline, like if you know silence can turn into thunder when truth finally speaks. It took months for the dust to finally settle, but when it did, nothing was the same. The confrontation that had once left me trembling in that marble living room became a ripple that spread across every part of our lives. Justice doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives like morning light, slow, steady, and impossible to stop. Daniel's fall was not sudden, but it was complete. The company where he had built his reputation as a financial advisor terminated his contract within a week. The official statement cited ethical violations under review, but everyone knew what it meant. His name was toxic now. Banks refused to work with him. Clients pulled out of every deal he touched. I heard through a colleague that he tried to start a new firm under a different name, but the internet never forgets. One search, and the truth followed him everywhere. He called once after everything collapsed. His voice was broken, stripped of arrogance, almost pleading. "Teresa," he said, "I lost everything, the house, my job, my reputation. Please, tell them I'm not the monster they think I am." I listened quietly, then asked, "Did you ever think of me that way when you called me a beggar, when you turned my daughter against me?" There was silence on the other end, the kind that carries regret, too heavy for words. Then he hung up. I never heard from him again. Anna, on the other hand, didn't disappear. She stayed. It took her time to face me again, to look me in the eyes without drowning in shame, but she did. She found a small apartment not far from mine and began working part-time at the shelter. Every morning, she arrived early carrying boxes of supplies, helping the women settle in. She never asked for forgiveness in words, she showed it in actions. One evening, as we sat together folding donated clothes, she said quietly, "Mom, when I saw you that night standing in front of everyone, I didn't just see my mother. I saw a woman I had forgotten existed, the one who built everything with her own hands." She looked down, tears glistening on her lashes. "I spent so many years trying to impress people who didn't matter, and in the process, I forgot the only person who ever did." I reached over and took her hand. "You lost your way," I said softly, "but now you're finding it again. That's what matters." Our relationship didn't heal overnight. There were still unspoken wounds, quiet spaces between us filled with what-ifs and regrets. But slowly, laughter began to return. We started having dinner together on Fridays, like we used to before Daniel's shadow darkened our lives. She'd bring home-cooked meals, I'd make tea. Some nights we sat in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have seen the worst of each other and still choose to stay. The shelter thrived. Within 6 months, we had housed 24 women, mothers, widows, grandmothers, each carrying stories of neglect, abandonment, and quiet survival. Some came in trembling, unsure if they deserved kindness anymore. But as they stayed, they found a kind of peace that mirrored my own. I spent my days helping them rebuild not just their lives, but their sense of worth. It became my life's second act, a legacy born out of betrayal. One morning, a letter arrived from the city council. They were awarding Teresa's Haven, a grant for community service. The envelope trembled in my hands as I opened it. There it was, official recognition, but what mattered more was what it symbolized: proof that dignity could rebuild everything greed tried to destroy. When the mayor visited the shelter for the ceremony, she shook my hand and said, "You've given this city something rare." An example. Cameras flashed, and I could almost hear my husband's laughter somewhere in the echoes of the room. After the event, one of the reporters asked, "What gave you the strength to stand up that night?" I looked straight into the lens. "Being underestimated," I said. "There's a quiet fury that grows in a woman when people mistake her kindness for weakness. One day, that fury becomes courage." That quote spread faster than I expected. It appeared in newspapers, social media posts, even on posters outside the shelter. Strangers began writing letters, women thanking me for reminding them that it's never too late to stand up for themselves. One woman wrote, "I'm 74 and just left an abusive son who kept my pension. You showed me I still have power." I kept that letter folded in my wallet. Anna found purpose again through the shelter. She began studying social work, determined to help women who had faced the same silence she once allowed. Watching her rebuild herself piece by piece was both painful and beautiful, a living reminder that redemption, like justice, requires effort. One evening, we stood together outside the shelter as the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting a golden glow across the city. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think our house was cursed after what happened." She looked at me, her eyes gentler now. "But maybe it wasn't cursed. Maybe it just needed to be reborn." I smiled. "That house was never cursed, Anna. It was blessed, because it gave us the chance to start over with honesty." For the first time in a long time, I saw peace in her face. She had let go of the past, and so had I. A few weeks later, I returned to the old house one last time. The garden had grown wild again, flowers reclaiming the soil like nature's quiet rebellion. I walked through the rooms, empty now, echoing with memories. I touched the walls, felt the cool surface of the marble I had chosen decades ago. We're finally free. I whispered to the space, to the ghosts, to myself. As I locked the door behind me, I didn't feel loss. I felt release. That house had been a battlefield, but now it was sacred ground, a monument not to pain but to endurance. That night, sitting at my window, I wrote one final note in my journal. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It lives quietly in the hearts of those who refused to kneel when life demanded it. If someone betrayed you and took everything you built, would you let it break you, or would you rebuild stronger on your own terms? Comment 1 if you believe dignity always finds its way home, like if you know no storm lasts forever. 6 months after that storm, the world felt quieter, lighter even. The chaos had faded into memory, leaving only stillness and clarity. Every morning, I woke to the soft hum of the city outside my apartment window, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the laughter of women from Teresa's Haven across the street. It was the sound of life being rebuilt, one act of courage at a time. I often walked to the small park near the shelter just after sunrise. The air was crisp, the sky a soft pink before the day unfolded. I'd sit on the same bench my husband and I once shared when we dreamed about the future, back when our hands were younger, our hearts lighter, and our plans endless. He had always said, "Home isn't just a place, Teresa. It's the people who make you feel seen." For a long time, I thought I had lost that. But now, watching the women at the shelter greet the morning with laughter, I realized I had found it again in a different form. One of them, a woman named Clara, approached me that morning with a steaming cup of tea. She had been living at the shelter for 3 months, a widow who had been forced out of her own house by greedy relatives. "You know," she said, sitting beside me when I came here, "I didn't think I could start over. But watching you, it makes me believe maybe I can." Her words hit me softly like sunlight through glass. "You already have, Clara," I said. "Starting over isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about learning how to carry it without letting it own you." She smiled and looked out at the park. "You make it sound easy." I shook my head. "It's not, but it's worth it." As we sat there, the first leaves of autumn drifted down, spinning in the air like quiet confessions. I thought of Anna, how she visited me every week now, no longer out of obligation, but out of love. We had found a rhythm again, gentle and real. She often helped me cook for the women, laughing the way she used to when she was a little girl covered in flour. Sometimes, when I caught her humming while chopping vegetables, I saw a flicker of the child she used to be, the one who promised to take care of me when I grew old. Maybe in her own way, she was keeping that promise now. Last Sunday, she brought me a letter. "It's from Daniel," she said quietly. My hands froze for a moment before I took it. The envelope was plain, the handwriting shaky. It read only, "I've lost everything, but I see now what I destroyed. I hope one day you can forgive me. Tell Anna I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her in the only way I knew how, even if it was wrong." I folded the letter without anger, without relief, just acceptance. "Will you answer him?" Anna asked. I shook my head. "No, some things don't need answers. Silence is enough." She nodded slowly, understanding. For the first time, we didn't need words to stand on the same side of truth. That evening, I walked through the shelter one last time before bed. The women were in the common room playing cards, laughing softly, sharing stories that once would have brought them shame, but now brought them connection. Every corner of that house, once filled with pain, now echoed with strength. I stopped by the wall near the entrance where we'd hung a small bronze plaque that read, "Built on dignity. Protected by courage, reborn from truth." I touched the cold metal and felt warmth rise inside me. For years I had lived believing that age meant fading away, that a woman's power dimmed as her body grew older. But now I knew the truth. Age doesn't steal strength, it distills it. It burns away vanity, fear and illusion until only truth remains. Outside, the city lights flickered to life. I stood by the window, the reflection of my gray hair shimmering against the glass like silver threads woven into the night. I thought of all the women who had stood where I once stood, mothers, wives, daughters, each one carrying invisible battles behind gentle smiles. We are told to endure quietly, to forgive easily, to give endlessly. But sometimes, endurance means standing tall when everyone expects you to kneel. Sometimes forgiveness begins only after you've demanded respect. That was my lesson, my inheritance to those who would come after me. Later, I walked to the old house one last time. It had been sold to the city for community use, a small art center, now filled with music and laughter. As I stood by the gate, a memory rose the night Daniel called me a maid, the sting of shame, the weight of silence. But instead of pain, I felt peace. The house was alive again, but not with arrogance, with meaning. I whispered to the walls that once betrayed me, "You're free now, we both are." As I turned to leave, a young woman passing by stopped and smiled. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "You're Mrs. Teresa, right?" "The woman from the video," I nodded, amused. "That's me, I suppose." She hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to say thank you. My mother showed me your story. It made me realize how important it is to stand up for ourselves." Her words lingered as she walked away. I looked up at the sky, painted with fading gold and deep blue, and felt something shift inside me. A quiet, sacred closure. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about erasing what happened. It's about choosing not to let it define who you are. Respect isn't given. It's reclaimed one act of courage at a time. As I walked home, the wind carried the faint laughter from the shelter behind me. For the first time in years, my steps felt light. Life had taken everything from me once, but it had given me back something far more powerful, the knowledge that no one, not time, not betrayal, not age, could steal my dignity unless I handed it to them. I stopped at the corner, turned to the camera of this memory, and spoke not just to those who had hurt me, but to everyone who ever felt small. You are never too old to begin again. You are never too broken to rise. Dignity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you let them. Would you forgive those who once humiliated you, or would you make them see your worth first? Comment 1. If you believe dignity is the greatest inheritance we can leave behind, like if you believe true strength begins when we stop apologizing for surviving,